So am I ready to start then?
Yep, you can begin now.
Okay, good morning everybody and welcome to this Puna Kōrero meeting of the 7th of May 2020. As you will have heard, we are officially opening the meeting and advising you as members that it's being live webcast to the Council's YouTube channel. So welcome to Jeff Moday and anyone else that cares to watch in these interesting times. Let's start with apologies. No apologies have been received. We'll move on to public forum where I can advise that no requests for the public to speak have been received. Does anyone have a conflict of interest to declare? That being the case, I will move on to extraordinary business, of which there are no items. Before we move to confirmation of minutes, I just want to say, point you to Jack's email of the 4th, where if we can play by the rules, if we wish to speak, please raise your hand and then I'll ask you to speak. So you can either stay muted and quiet or unmute when I ask you to speak. So if we can just play by those rules, that would be great. Let's then move to the confirmation of minutes of the Puna Kōrero meeting of the 19th of March this year. I'll move that these be a true and correct record. Thank you, Izzy, for seconding that. Does anyone have any comments or alterations on the minutes? I'm waiting. No. So all those in favour, please say aye.
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 I'm assuming
Aye.
that yeah, okay. Everyone has said aye. And I declare those minutes received. We'll now move to the reports. So we have 2 reports on the table today to deal with. And so we'll move to the first one, which is 6.1, which is the rates remission and postponement policy, dealing with a proposed commercial rates deferral amendment. Now, I would like, as chair, to put an additional recommendation to the recommendations that are on the page there, on page 10, an item 4, or sorry, a recommendation 4, which just is a point of clarification, which I will read. It says, note the recommendation option, which is option 1, referred to in the paper, is to provide the deferral to all businesses in the rating groups 13, 15, and 16. So basically that is just for the clarification, so that we know when we look back, as I like to do, make it clear that what we're actually confirming. So I would like to move the motion that's on the table. Thank you, Mike. And that includes the new note number 4, which is note the recommended option, brackets option 1, is to provide the deferral to all businesses in the rating groups 13, 15, and 16. So, Mike, you've seconded the report. I would now, what I'd like to do is now to begin to discuss the report, 6.1. But before I do that and ask Roy Baker to talk to us as council, I just wanted to make a few comments about this paper. Just noting that this is a commercial rates deferral proposal, and it will go out for consultation tomorrow if approved, because there's a rather tight time frame given all other things. And I note in particular points 14 and 15 of the paper, and in particular that if the value of the business sector shrinks, then the rate burden is going to shift to residential and rural. And those councillors that have experienced this previously, we know what happens from revaluations in this sector. The proposal obviously recognises the importance of the business sector and how it benefits all residents and ratepayers, for it to be strong and thriving. So that means both in terms of rate contributions and local employment. The proposal is not going to cost non-business ratepayers anything. Overall, it's going to be both fiscally and rate impact neutral. Now, some of you have asked that what we could do particularly for the residential and rural sectors. And I think that's a fair question, which Roy Baker will address again when he talks to the proposal now. So Roy, with those few brief comments, Roy, would you please introduce us to the proposal and talk to it in detail?
Yes, okay. Thank you, Chair. Councillors, this paper, as the Chair said, tries to recognise the importance that the business sector is to the whole of Pōrero, and this proposal is designed to be a tool to help them recover in the difficult times, obviously with their revenue falling away and cash flow difficulties that they're likely to be facing in the next 12 months. I'll just give a couple of facts around the residential side in terms of why we aren't necessarily looking to specifically address that. As of yesterday, we had 69 inquiries from residential ratepayers regarding hardship, so that's not a significant amount. I think one councillor previously had asked about the number of direct debits. We have 8,459 ratepayers are on direct debits and 1,784 on automatic payments. So all residential ratepayers that are on either DD or APs, they never sort of qualify or never get into the situation where they're charged a penalty because they're on a payment scheme and they effectively clear their debt by the 30th of June in the year in question. So that's sort of what happens for the residential parties. Where people do have hardship, they do approach us and we enter into the payment arrangements with people. But as I said, to date, in response to the current situation, we've only had 69. I would say that from a residential perspective, I don't see there's an economic case to extend this sort of proposal to residential or rural. There may well be a political desire, but you'd have to assume that all ratepayers would take up the option if we were to broaden it to all ratepayers. That would see our debt levels increase by $60 million. And that would take us to pretty close to 200 million. We're currently at the end of March we have a debt of 125 million. And of course, we have to fund the capital program for next year as well. I think broadening it to across the whole sector would put the financial strength of council at risk. Our debt levels would be high, and look at taking 60 million of debt to effectively run our operations would put us under the spotlight of Standard & Poor's, who are due to come over to see us in June, July for the rating. And a rating downgrade would see as a likely outcome of that. That would sort of cost us money. They'd like to question the financial prudence in terms of extensive debt for an operating purpose, even acknowledging the COVID situation. So I think the other thing is across the board, while we'll be able to manage internally with what's we're proposed with the commercial sector there, if all ratepayers were to take it up, we would need to take on some additional staff resource to manage it because it is quite complex in terms of how we'd have to do our systems and put charges on everyone and then do the follow-ups. So in terms of the paper itself, in particular the business sector, we do think it's vital for the recovery of that sector. They do contribute a significant amount of rate income for us, and as the chair mentioned, if that sector was to contract, then our cost structure remains the same regardless of whether it contracts or not, and that increases the rate burden that would have to go on both the rural and the residential sector, and the impact is effectively like a revaluation coming forward. I'd like just to take you through the proposal itself so people fully understand it, and that's, I'm referring now to paragraph 23. So what we're proposing here is to defer the 2021 rates and give the commercial sector that option of doing it for either 6 or 12 months, depending upon their cash flow situation. We will obviously charge interest on that deferred amount at 3.58%, which is our average cost of interest as per the next year's budget. And they would then respread or recover, we would recover that deferred rate payment equally over 3 years from 21-22, and interest would be on the balance. We would make sure that we were protected from the council and put a charge on the properties to ensure we could get that monies back in the future, and we'd look to have a one-off charge of $250 plus GST cover the administration of doing that and the cost of actually putting that charge on the property. While we wouldn't look to enforce property owners that they pass it on to tenant if they had it, we would encourage them to do so. And upon reflection, and one of the reasons why when we come down looking at the options, if I looked at a business perspective, the rent that a business would pay to a landlord far exceeds their contribution they would be paying to any rates contribution. So tenants that receive rates flow through, while it's a benefit, it certainly would not be as significant as if the landlord was able to pass on a rent holiday or some form of rent reduction. And by enabling that landlord to do so by making their cash flow easier, we think that might be more of a possibility. It's needed to point out in paragraphs 24 and 25 that this proposal currently only covers the Kōrero City Council rates. We are in discussions with Greater Wellington to see if we can wrap that under them as well. But if we can't do that, then under this proposal, the commercial ratepayer would still be required to pay every quarter their share of the Greater Wellington invoice. We have 4 options there. Option 1, which is the preferred option across the board, and options 2 and 3 suggest different variations of those, whether we try and restrict it around to either those that were in essential services or someone that perhaps had could demonstrate hardship through reductions in revenue, very much like the government system had for wages. And of course, option 4 is the status quo. So I guess because all under the proposal, it's fiscally neutral to all non-commercial ratepayers and council in terms of that we get our money back and the interest they will pay on it. Whether you had options 1, 2, or 3, the fiscal impact is the same. So I just think that restricting it won't get you the same benefit that you might like. There's also the assumption that if you didn't qualify for, if you qualified for a under option one of our options 3, which is limited scheme availability, and suggests they have to have evidence of a 30% reduction in turnover or qualified for the government grant. A number of businesses didn't qualify for the government grant but have still suffered hardship, and we know particularly a couple of commercial major tenants around the place that have been in discussions with us around their rates. So it would maybe disadvantage those sorts of businesses that didn't qualify but still suffered. And as it's fiscally neutral, we think the broader it is, the quicker the uptake, and also therefore the bigger impact it will have in terms of recovery. Just referring now to paragraphs on the financial implications. It's on page 14, where I just wanted to see how it sets out for council. And we've given you an example there of the impact of the rates at 17 million for council and how that would apply, and it shows you the increased debt that we would be taking on board, and then how that reduces over the following 3 years, and the interest payments are also recovered back from that. In the proposal itself, it sets out an example not only for how it works for council, but also for a ratepayer that would have a rate bill of $100,000, so they can see that. I think that's probably the main themes of the scheme itself. We are proposing to go out and obviously consult on this, and then come back and incorporate this into the long-term, the annual plan, if that is what the council adopts. So, Chair, I'm happy to take specific questions on the policy or any of the proposal itself.
Thank you, Roy. I see we have a number of people wanting to have questions. Mayor Baker, I think your hand has been up for a while. You would like to ask a question?
I didn't have a question. I'm wanting to support the policy at option 1. I've spoken to a number of businesses and ratepayers over the break. And for me, a lot of the ratepayers didn't actually realise they could set up alternative payments for their rates. A number have gone to weekly payments instead of monthly to juggle. And I don't think adding a $250 fee to a residential ratepayer would actually work, whereas the businesses are really struggling. And without the businesses, we don't have the jobs for the people. So for me, the business rate option is best to go out with. So that's the one I'll be supporting, at option 1.
Thank you, Anita. Councillor Duncan, I see you're next.
Great, thanks, Ross. Yeah, look, I support option 1. It makes perfect sense to me. I just had one question there. We're putting a charge against a property if they defer the rates. I understand some tenants actually pay the rates on some of these business places. Is that true?
Through you, Chair, yes. Often the landlords will pass those rates on as an operating cost to the tenant.
So how would you put a charge against that property then if the tenant was responsible for the rates?
That's an arrangement between the property owner and the tenant, and we have no legal sort of relationship with that tenant. We do have the relationship with the property owner. The issue for us is that if they pass it on to the property, the tenant, and the tenant doesn't pay, the landowners and the property owner still is liable for it to us. So they will have to work out their own arrangements.
Thanks.
Is that it? Right. Thank you. Councillor Trillin.
Thanks, Chair. So I just wanted to say, so I broadly support this, particularly given the fact that it's fiscally neutral. There doesn't seem to be any major downsides. My main concern when we had initially been discussing this had been around if there were businesses that would fail and that would leave us with a deficit, but that's been addressed, I think, at 23E by putting the charge over properties. And I prefer option 1. I don't see any reason to exclude businesses given the fact that it is fiscally neutral. My question very quickly, Roy, just around, you mentioned that there would not be any requirements to pass the rates savings, or it's not savings, but the short-term cash flow onto tenants. And I was just wondering if you could just elaborate a little bit more around that, and if we were to decide that we did want it a requirement for the take-up to be that the benefit was passed on to tenants, what would the process look like in order to do that? Thank you.
Through you, Chair. Look, I think if it would be actually quite a complex process to require that to be passed on. We would have to cite some sort of agreement between the property owner and the tenant. And if you took, for example, probably the biggest one is North City, the shopping centre itself. They do have, they pass on the rates to all their 100-odd occupants there. So that would be sort of 100 agreements that we'd have to have a look at and understand. There is still that legal issue, of course, that we do have the contract with the landowner, and that's why the charge goes on the property, so that we're always protected. We couldn't put a charge on the business. That would have to be a deal that they would have to do. So, and I think if you have a look at the from a business perspective, the portion of their costs that a tenant would pay in rent as part of an operating cost far outweighs the operating cost contribution that they make towards rates. So I think it's more of an incentive for the landlord to try and make a rental concession in some form or another to its tenants, and we do see that and hear of that a lot coming through. Because from a commercial perspective, it's better for the property owner to retain the tenant for longer term. If that tenant fails, it would be quite difficult to replace a tenant in today's environment. So I do know of people that are taking reducing the rent payments for a period to ensure that their tenants survive. And like I said, rent payment is a far greater portion of their costs than a contribution towards the rates outgoings would be. Does that address your question?
Yeah, no, but broadly it does. And just from a process perspective, I just wanted to confirm, is that something that we need to be deciding on today, or is it possible for us to pass this in principle as it has been proposed? And if we wanted to have that conversation around requiring that it's passed on to tenants, that we could do that when this goes to council? I just want to confirm that.
Through you, Chair. Look, I think the time for that would be as part of the deliberations when we've had the feedback from the consultation process.
Yep.
Agree. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much. That's all my questions.
Okay, Josh. Thank you. Councillor Wehapi.
Good morning. I just want to say first off that I do support this proposal. I think it is very important that we do support business. I just have some reservations, as you all know, regarding an option that we can offer to those that are experiencing hardship due to COVID-19. And I just don't believe that we have anything really in place for those for those people that are going to lose their jobs or have lost their jobs. Obviously, we don't know yet. Yes, we may have only had 69 calls, but as Mayor Baker pointed out, we also we're not very good at executing the message, I believe, and so there are lots of ratepayers out there that don't know that there are options available to them. You know, whether that be because they don't read their rates bill or they're not on Facebook, I don't know. But I feel like with the whole residential, if you're in genuine hardship, it's kind of borderline condescending. So putting this out there saying, like, we care about businesses, you know, not only is there the rent relief, there's the rates relief, you know, it just doesn't really show that we are thinking of those that are in real hardship as well. I'm not saying that it's an option that we put out there to all our ratepayers, and I understand that there's no way we could afford that. What I'm saying is that there should be something other than a case-by-case basis in place where people, you know, we're ensuring that we are looking after our most vulnerable affected by COVID-19. Okay, this has got nothing to do with areas and stats and all that kind of thing. It's the people that can't afford their weekly or fortnightly options. And the other thing is I take offence actually that it looks like political gain if we're caring about our most vulnerable ratepayers. Sorry, but I did take offence to that, Roy. The other thing is, you know, when push comes to shove, and I've seen it with this council, you know, where there's a way, we find a way. You know, even when we've been presented with some pretty hefty decisions beyond our control, we have always found a way. So I don't see how we couldn't offer that option to some or to a few ratepayers. The other thing is, obviously there would be some strict criteria around offering a rates relief to a ratepayer. I don't know what that looks like, but I just think it's something that we should kind of think about, really. There are lots of other councils that have addressed not just the business sector in quite a few areas. And I just think that we need to look after all ratepayers. But as I said, I definitely support this paper, but that's just my rant. Thank you.
Thanks, Kylie. Councillor Hayward.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. Ngā mihi nui ki kia koutou katoa tēnei ata. Thank you, Roy, for speaking to the report. I have one question before I give commentary. Can I ask that question and come back? Is that all right? My question is the 8459 and the 1749. It was my question that I had asked Roy, so thank you for following up on it. What is the proportion of those as a subset of the residential ratepayers for Porirua? I just want to know the proportion.
Through you, Chair. Look, I think that we're about 49% or nearly 50% of total ratepayers are either on DD or automatic payments. So that's actually quite high for a council, I believe. So we're not too bad.
Mm.
Thank you for responding to that, Roy. I only have commentary. I will indicate my reluctant support for the 4 recommendations, the 3 on paper and the 4th noted by you, Chair. I wanted to talk Kylie's sentiment expressed earlier. She's actually taken a few of the points I was going to raise. I appreciate the need to support business, but I'm also mindful that this process what this process resigns us to. In the COVID-19 response plan, we place community welfare as a theme, then support the local economy as a theme. There are other themes as well. Now, I accept the feedback that has come from Roy from and his advice as the council's advice around the challenges of extending this to this rates with remission to residences and the potential risk for our debt if the assumption that every residential ratepayer was to take that offer up on board. Yet I'm equally mindful that the council has in public appears to have not front-footed the support in an equivalent way to households. I reject this notion that we are all in the same boat. If anything, we're all in the same storm, but we have our own boats that we're all trying to navigate in this space. By coming out, and at the moment we've done work on trying to reduce through the annual plan what our rates increase was going to be. We've given some relief to council-owned properties. Many of those are commercial tenants, but we haven't really expressed a great deal yet on the impacts to locals and the welfare aspect, in my opinion. So for me, it looks like we've got all these boats in the harbour. Some are big, some are small. And what the council is saying by putting this process out first and front-footing it, and I know that we have to have that process in a timely fashion so we can move things forward. But it looks as though for those few number of boats that are slightly larger, we're saying we're going to help you bail your water out. And to this large number of smaller boats all around the bay, you're on your own. So I would urge my fellow councillors to consider how we are looking with the public in terms of our overall response to COVID-19. I would ask that when we come to this issue and any other issue that's going to come up, we think about, are we helping all the boats, or are we helping those boats in accordance with the COVID-19 response plan, particularly around the welfare? I will stop talking now before I look like I'm getting even higher on the soapbox, but thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hayward. Councillor Sayuli.
Thank you, Ross. Brilliant analogy, Councillor Hayward. Jeff, that's an awesome analogy. Never thought about it that way. Hey, just a couple of questions from me and comment, I suppose. Let me see where I put my question. Oh yeah, I didn't quite hear because it's not in front of us your amendment, Ross. So maybe it's covered with what I'm about to say. But just regarding option 1, Ross, just a question, Ross, regarding option one. What do you mean by provide options to all businesses and community to defer? What are the options?
Sorry, what I was attempting to do, Farfoy, was in the paper, there's an option one.
Yeah.
Right? I wanted to make it clear that that's what we were recommending, option one, because that's option one is recommended when we go out with the proposal, all right, for consultation. That's all I was doing.
Oh, okay. So my question then is actually in option one, it talks about options. So Roy, this question for Roy. So are those options, are we then saying to the businesses to say, you still have an option to choose either or are we actually saying this is it?
So through you, Chair. Option one, what we're referring to there is that it means that the business community could decide to take up the offer of deferring their rates for 12 months, or they could take it up and defer it for 6 months. So there's an option of either 6 months, 12 months, or not at all. So that's effectively what we're providing under that option.
Right.
Yeah.
So I suppose, I'm not sure whether you may have answered this, but so in that case, so if they chose 6 months, just say half of the business chose 6 months and the other half chose 12, does that mean, I mean, obviously the variation in charges or the rate would differ. Did you have that down as, did you had that down?
So perhaps if I explain this way, so what would happen is that businesses may decide that they actually need a little bit of support cash flow wise, but don't think they need it for 12 months because you have to pay for it. There's an interest component on it, but they would benefit for 6 months. So what that would mean is that they would defer their first 2 installments 1 and 2, and then they would pay installments 3 and 4. So installments 1 and 2 would then carry over. That would be the deferred amounts that they would then repay back over the following 3 years. So it's just giving them some choice.
Right. Okay. Cool. Thank you. I've got another question, please. Just going back to this residential rates. Roy, just a question. How many of our ratepayers have been penalised for late payment in the last financial year, I suppose? Do we have a record of that?
Through you, Chair. Yes, we will have a record for that. I just don't have the answer now. I do know that periodically when we check up on this question that comes up, it runs at about the same amount year upon year. So we haven't seen an increase over the recent years, but I can get that amount for you.
And what is Rosa, in recent years? What's been the trend? In terms of late payment. I just want to compare it to when this one comes up.
So no, we haven't seen a big movement in late payments. I think we might have mentioned to council a couple of months ago that we did have an increase in late payments from the business sector a little while ago, because the date that we had the penalty strike was the 18th of the month, and of course they pay all their bills on the 20th of the month. So we did not penalise businesses that paid on the 20th because of that, just those 2 days. So it was just a note that we will take going forward when we set the penalty dates in the future. So we haven't seen a trend going up, and in particular this time we are not really applying penalties as a result of the COVID situation. As long as people come and contact us and explain the situation, then we're fine. We don't put the penalty on.
Okay, so all right. Has that been? Are you sure, Roy?
I'll check on that if you like.
Yeah. I suppose another, just following on from that, is that with those that are doing automatic payments, if they've been, they've paid it automatic payments in faith that they've paying enough for it, but with those that maybe may have, or even direct debit, for instance, maybe they have what I'm trying to say, they didn't get their payments or they didn't make their payments, they didn't penalised. I was wondering whether we need to call some of those. Just kind of wondering about the residential ratepayers.
Through you, Chair, look, I don't have that specific detail, but I do know from just talking to the team recently that we haven't seen an uptake or an increase in the amount of accounts, automatic payments that are reversed out, that are default. In other words, there's not enough money in the bank to pay it and the bank takes it back. What we have seen in a number of inquiries through, which is not included in the 69, that a number of ratepayers have contacted us and are amending their either APs or DDs to reflect that payment stream. So people are aware of that. So we're not, I don't think we're being very harsh, we're harsh at all. We're being quite supportive of anyone that contacts us.
Thank you. And lastly, I mean, I support what Kylie's saying too, is how we can support our most vulnerable people out there. And I think it might, with that information, Roy, it might give us an indication of those who have lapsed. Yeah, that might give us an indication of who's struggling, who's not. And yeah, 69 people doesn't necessarily equate to the people that might be struggling out there in the community. Thank you.
So just on that, through you, Chair, we can we'll follow it up, and if people are do miss a payment, you know, we do follow up with them directly, and we can actually talk to them. We will talk them through their payment options. Also, when we go out to consult on this, we might propose some messages around, you know, to the residential ratepayers, just reinforcing the schemes about APs or DDs, and talking to us about payment plans if they are struggling. So we can sort of communicate that when we go out with the business proposal.
Thanks, Roy. Is there anyone else that would like to make a comment or ask a question?
Yes, please.
Certainly. Councillor Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First a question and then some just a comment. Mr. Baker, around the businesses, I just wondered if we had factored around, obviously some of these businesses are not going to make it through the COVID-19 pandemic. So have we made allowances for those who we defer and then actually cannot pay because they're going to go under?
So through you, Chair, the issue with that is if people take up the scheme and then go under, that's the purpose of the charge, because remember, we have a charge on all rates over the property. So when the property would ultimately be sold, we get first dibs on the proceeds before it goes to the new purchaser, or they have to be cleared to go to purchase. So that's the purpose of putting that that registered charge on them to cover that extra amount.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that. And I just want to call Councillor Weehappi's comments around some of the stuff that we, I guess, that we're putting out into our community. I think we workshopped this a week ago, and there was a lot of support around us providing some support to our residents. God, I now got a croaky voice. I might have to go get tested. And the thing is, like, we understand, I think all of the councillors understood outside of that, during that workshop, that we needed to support the businesses moving forward. However, we have a lot of residents out there, and I take on board Mr. Baker's comments again about this being seen as a political view, but it actually isn't. We represent all these people that are struggling, and we are getting calls outside of the 69 that are coming through to our call centre that people who are really struggling and are, as Councillor Hayward said, are not in the same waka as many of the businesses or in similar, but not the same waka as many other people in our community. I just wondered, Mr. Baker, whether our staff could look at, I take on board your comments around if we put it out there that all ratepayers would then take this option up and defer their payments. However, if we had looked around putting similar criteria that we have provided the businesses with, then perhaps we could alleviate that concern that you had. So I note that other councils around New Zealand have given that option, and that the residents have to go through certain criteria around proving that they had at least had a reduction of income around 20%, not the 30% threshold that is for businesses. So I just wondered if our staff could look around at those sort of options so that it could alleviate Councillor Wehapi's concerns, Councillor Hayward's, and many other of the councillors that actually voiced those similar concerns in our workshop that we had.
Can I just say something here, Roy and councillors? Obviously the tenor of a number of you around the table is that we need to have a look at the residential side of the business. We're here today to talk about this commercial rates deferral. I hear what you're saying, and I think that we would and should ask officers to have a look at the points that you've been raising, which are many of which are good points, and that we should have a separate meeting for this, hopefully sometime next week or shortly thereafter, when we have the ability to get round the table face to face. So, I mean, I think that would be a fair way forward in order to ask our officers to do this, so we can have that discussion.
And I think you're right, Mr. Chair. However, I do note that the time is precious, and if we're going out to consultation on this particular option, we did workshop this. I do feel like councillors did give a clear indication to staff that this is the path we wanted to move in, and then we're presented with the paper that doesn't actually reflect some of those views. So I just wanted that noted.
I think that can be noted. I did not get that from the meeting, because that workshop we had was always about, my understanding, about a commercial rates deferral. What you're doing now is, in terms of actually making a decision, is muddying the water and trying to make policy on the hop. And I just think that is a very difficult thing to do. I think the circumstances between commercial and residential are significantly different in terms of having to think about what we might do in the future. And I don't think that we want to add too much to the proposal, which indeed has to go out tomorrow if you look at the timetable, to be able to put something in there which we won't have seen, and to come back and approve it again.
And as I say, I appreciate that, and I stand by the comments that in the workshop that we had, those views were, in my opinion, clearly voiced. However, I also accept Mr. Baker's comments that when we do go out in future, we will highlight some of those schemes to all our residents, that there are payment plans that are available, and perhaps, as Councillor Wehapi has identified, we haven't been clear on those when we have gone out to our residents.
Okay. So if that's possible, Roy, I mean, I think that's fine. But if we do want to discuss it further, we can do so in the future as well. So is there anyone else that would like to talk? I see Councillor Morell, you'd like to say something, and then Councillor Duncan.
Can you hear me now?
Can do.
Good morning, everybody. Well, look, I fully endorse the recommendation, option one, and just remind councillors that whatever we do in deferring rates or costs, it does add costs to, and at the end of the day, someone has to pay. I am sympathetic for the residential, obviously, and we are going to get a kick in the backside when we go out at our rate rise of 4.78 or 98. When Upper Hutt's come out this morning at 2% or 2 point something or other. So what I suggest that we need strongly to look at is in the long-term plan that we are about to go into next year, that we have to very seriously look at how we run this council, what our costs are, and the best saving that we can do to our ratepayers is to look at how we can reduce costs so that they will have a reduced rate increase. I think it's, while I have sympathy for Councillor Wehapi, it's not possible, just not possible to offer this to everybody. It would put us in a ridiculous situation. And I don't know, also, I know you're screaming at me there, Councillor Wehapi. I can see your facial expressions. But it is just not an option, because if we start to discriminate between certain people, then the others are going to have to end up paying for those. So I think we have to be fair to all ratepayers. There is a procedure that if there is hardship, genuine hardship, they have the ability to make application on a one-by-one case, and I'm sure council officers would be very sympathetic and come up with a scheme. But I do not support that any suggestion that we should be applying this right across the board. So I fully endorse number one, option one.
Thanks very much, Councillor Morell. Councillor Duncan, I will allow these 2 extra questions, but I don't want to go over old ground, because it's clear what we have to decide on here. We can have other discussions outside this meeting. So, Councillor Duncan?
Yeah, thanks, Ross. Look, I think what councillors are losing sight of here is we're not giving anything away to businesses. They're actually being given a loan and they'll pay interest on it. So it is actually fiscally neutral, and we need to remember that. If we were to give relief to ordinary residents, that would be the same option, and they wouldn't be getting anything for nothing.
Yeah, fair point. Councillor Wehapi.
Yeah, sorry, it's just clarification that I never said that this option should be for all residential ratepayers, and I never said it should be across the board. That's not responsible. But what I am asking, or how are we ensuring that our most vulnerable payers, ratepayers affected by COVID-19, who are facing tough times, are being helped and being taken seriously?
Thanks, Councillor Wehapi. I mean, I think those points have been noted, and that we do need to discuss some of this going forward. The points made around additions to this existing proposal in terms of what options are available already for all ratepayers are going to be clarified. But I now believe that we should put the motion, including number 4, the recommendation that it's option 1 that's is our preference. So I'll put those in. I'll put the motion now. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Yep. Right. Given that that stuff is coming through, I declare, or those against, sorry, you might like to do that verbally. Anyone against? No one against. Therefore, I declare the motion carried. Thank you for that discussion, everybody. Let's now move to item 6.2, which is the long-term plan 2021 to 51. I'll move the report to get it on the table. Do I have a seconder, please?
Yeah.
Oh, thanks very much, Jeff. Seconded by Jeff. Okay. Do I have anyone? I mean, I think this is pretty clear in terms of timing and the things that need to be done. Is there anyone, any officer that is available to just run through this for us, or shall we get straight into discussion? I don't know whether Nick's available. Or, yeah, thanks, Nick.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, I can just present an overview. Yep. Morning, Mayor Baker and councillors. Nice to see you all. So I know it's a bit hard to get into business as usual projects when our minds are so full of the pandemic and all that we're grappling with in it. So this paper is really to just provide you with an overview of the long-term plan, thinking that we've put in so far to date around assumptions, the process, and what part you have to play in the long-term plan journey. We've tried to keep it at a high level for you. I know for those of you who have been through a long-term plan, this is probably no new news, But for those who are new to it, I think it's important that you have that warm up essentially to the long-term plan process and where we're heading. So you'll see what we've asked really is to note that we've asked for approval to go to a 30-year long-term plan, probably even more relevant now with the COVID-19 pandemic. Then we've also got some assumptions that we're making, which we just want to check that you're comfortable with those. We'll bring the strategic directions, check in with you at a workshop, hopefully next week, if we're all back in the chambers. So really it's just that overview. So over to you for any questions, if you've got them. We have Steph and Michelle on standby if I can't answer.
Okay, do councillors have any questions regarding this? Councillor Baker and then Councillor Sayuli.
Oh, no.
Sorry, Mayor Baker.
That's okay. It's a good paper, Nick. I just wanted to confirm, because we haven't set our strategic direction correctly yet, we have only done a workshop, that you are going to do that before we go into this next stage, because councillors have to realise that when we get into this, the timeline's really tight, and when we have to make decisions, it's quite hard and detailed. So I'm happy with that. I just wanted to make sure that you were waiting for our strategic direction.
Yes, definitely. I'll send you out an email again to remind you, and we've got it scheduled in a workshop for the 14th on the basis that we're back in the chambers then. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, thanks very much, Nick. Yes, it is a very tight timetable. Councillor Sayuli.
Thank you, Ross. Hey, just a question, Nick, just regarding the very last assumption, Access Pōrero will proceed with 56% subsidy. What do you mean by that? What's 56%? Where's the 56% subsidy coming from? And
I'm through you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to pass that to Steph or Steve to answer. Steph, are you there and able to answer that question?
Yeah, kia ora, Nick. Through you, Chair. It's the 56% subsidy is just in reference to NZTA contribution.
Oh,
yeah.
Thank you.
Of course, sorry. Thank you, Steph.
And just to clarify, Access Pōrero is the combination of roading projects related to the transport strategy for all of Pōrero.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Does that answer your question, Pāwhoi? Great, great. Councillor Trillam.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. Yeah, just wanted to really quickly, in particular, note support for the 30-year long-term plan. I think it's a good idea that we're moving to a longer term, and with a lot of the issues that we're going to be focusing on, and I'm thinking particularly around climate change and the climate crisis, that's really important. And in particular as well, noting the assumption that the organisation will be carbon neutral by 2030 and negative by 2050. And that really a 30-year long-term plan is crucial to us achieving that. But that was everything I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thanks, Josh. Is there anyone else, before I put the motion, is there anyone else that would like to say anything? Nobody's indicating anything at this stage. So in that case, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Great. Excellent. I declare those against, you can put a thumbs down if you like, but I'll declare the motion carried. So that brings us to the end of the meeting without any other business. I thank anyone that's watching and thank councillors for their input. I think we've had some very good input today and some things for us to think about and chew over. So I'll now declare the meeting closed. Thank you, everybody.